Good evening, race fans, and here we are joined again in partnership with the JSRA for practice session for the weekly race event. Uh, we are at the Paul Ricard circuit, also used for the French Grand Prix. And the drivers are going around in the Audi R8 GT2 LMS series car. And I am joined by my ever optimistic, enthusiastic co-host.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's the only thing I have on my belt. Being enthusiastic as I'm accompanied by the one word God, master of ceremonies, Chad. How are you doing this evening, Chad?
I'm doing all right, and boy, if flattery was a sport, you'd be quicker than anybody on track. Oh gosh. Yeah, so we have a few drivers out on circuit at the moment. Um, we'll be joined throughout the evening by the other drivers. We'll be here with you for an hour, maybe two. Depends on what the on circuit traffic is like. And we will see what the times are looking like as the drivers vie for their setups and putting their laps together for the race tomorrow.
Is this a truck you've ever driven on personally, Chad?
Yes, I did put in a few laps this week.
This car?
Same car, same track.
Okay.
Uh,
My only experience
Scale of
with this was I always speak of it, the F2004.
right.
Actually, the R25 as well.
Okay.
It's not an easy track. It's not as simple as it probably seems. Driving the view, the cockpit view, in my estimation, is something because the flat view of this track, the corners just creep up on it.
Oh, that
Especially the last corner. I always have an issue with the very last corner.
Yep.
To go on the start finish straight.
Yep. So this is certainly a track of two halves. The first half is very technical. Well, you can say the technicalities start from sector 3 and end at sector 1. And sector 2 is a fairly straight sector. But yeah, no, that final corner, because it is a very technical section in that you come out of a very aggressive turn, sweeping turn, to go into a hairpin almost immediately. So as soon as you get the power down, it's time to brake.
Definitely.
And so we can have some onboard looks for some of the drivers, as Eastman has previously done a 203, which is not a representative time, I don't think. Even I from the commentary box have done a 2 flat.
Oh, really? I've never actually paid attention to the times, but
So I think we'll see the times tumbling down to the 158s, 157s, and again, that's why I'm here and not on track.
you know the record for this car probably on this track? Has there been
so
an
actually-
established record?
We have a graphic to feature this week, Andrew, that can tell us some kind of, can give us a little bit of information on what's happening here. We'll bring up our live time graphic. We see the pro times versus pro amateur times versus amateur times. So, as you can see, pro times we're looking at 155s. And as the drivers are trying to find their footing here, maybe with a bit of setup alterations, and trying to find the pole, or trying to find where you put the pole down. you will see some errors taking place throughout the session.
Some I think it's gonna be quite a bit, especially for those first time driving on this track. It's fun once you get the hang of it, but as you said, sector 3.
Yes.
Oh my!
That is.
Oh my! You don't know where to place the car before carnage.
And it's a funny sector in that most tracks you can find your braking points using a marker, etc., etc. That sector is almost entirely by feeling, because where you can spot braking points, they're not necessarily helpful.
The braking points are practically in the corner.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Some of
that
them
weird.
are. You trail brake through a lot
Yeah.
of these corners. But in looking at, well, in anticipation of the mistakes that we will be seeing throughout the session, in an interview we had with Tommy Gore some time back, he does both sim racing and real life racing, and he was saying that the difference in what he has experienced between the two is that whereas in real life you have to kind of feel your way around the track, in sim racing you just go, you push to the limit and then figure it out from there. So it's almost the exact opposite of what you do in real life, which is probably why you see the drivers pushing so hard throughout the session, as Jaden Harrison puts up what we expect to be the representative times today.
Okay.
So one to watch for this weekend is Jaden Harrison.
As usual, every week.
Yes,
Every week.
one lap pace is something that he definitely has. The JSRA has been working with him to develop his consistency, which is part of the measures that the JSRA is doing with the sim racing platform and the sim racing environment, where they hope to help develop these young talents. So like a Jaden Harrison, who can find one lap pace just by raw talent, with the JSRA's help, he's been able to find some amount of consistency and work on other aspects of his racing craft.
Yes, there's definitely Jaden has made a huge jump, as we can see, and he's actually, it's not a fluke. It's been consistent for the past 3 races. So far, his improvement.
Yes.
No DNFs, finish all the way to the line, not giving up.
Well, with the exception of some unforeseen circumstances, yes, in most cases he would. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how far this driver can go, because he does show great promise thus far. As we're riding on board with the chart topper here, Mr. Jaden Harrison, we're just having a look at his onboards, see what this driver does throughout, and that is a corner that is a doozy. You want to lift just enough but not lose too much momentum throughout this entire section, just so that you carry the maximum amount of speed through those corners for as little time lost as possible. Same for this section, and this is what makes Sector 3 such a very complicated and technical section, in that
I tell you, each other, I've driven on this so many times, trying to master it, and watching it, it feels brand new. Feels like the first time again. That corner that you're just speaking about. I mean, in the F1 car, it's basically flat out.
It is, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The driving this, you really have to relearn to drive again.
Yeah, so each car you take to each track is a little bit different.
No, this one is definitely different, bro. I cannot. Okay, here's a probably a nice part of the track, probably one of the most fun parts because I can see what's happening. After this, it's all guesstimation.
Very much so. It becomes very much by feeling throughout the second half of the lap. But I notice Jaden Harrison here being very aggressive with track limits. It is interesting to note. Track limits for the entire circuit are the white lines. If you put all 4 tires outside of those lines, you will invalidate your lap, which is quite aggressive compared to most other circuits. You will find that drivers will be invalidating throughout this session.
And by the white lines, you mean both lines?
The inside white line.
The inside.
If you put all 4 tires outside of that the first white line,
Okay.
you are outside of track limits. That's what makes some of these corners so tricky because, for example, this section here, as you see Jaden taking a double brake, gearing down twice, it becomes a problem in that you could carry more speed through the corner, but you may run it a little bit wide. Jaden Harrison seems to be finding some time here. So we may be looking at some 156s, Andrew, which is only a second off pro pace.
It would be interesting to see what Europa does.
Yes,
that's the server, another top contender in the one lap series, that's what I call it.
So that's a little tight for that corner there for Jaden. Could have run it a little bit wider. Get back on the power a little earlier, but maybe he takes that line for a reason as he finds a 157 dead. So who am I to judge his lines?
Maybe it's quicker to rotate it like that than try to drift it because you take a longer time to get on the power approaching like that. But
indeed.
We don't know.
And it's interesting the line he takes through that turn 2 there as well. It's very tight, well, very aggressive to track limits in that he puts most of the car over those lines. So I think we're on an in-lap here with Jaden. Let's take a look at what's happening with the other drivers out on track. Mitch and Wallace here looks as he just completed a 203. Maybe just coming to grips with the car, trying to find his lines. The drivers seem to take a very aggressive approach towards that inside turn 2 there. I guess you have to attack that corner because if you drift it too wide, you lose too much time going down that straight.
Misha, not necessarily one of the fastest one-lappers, but definitely, if not the most consistent driver out there.
Yes, he certainly does have the consistency that some of the other drivers lack. He will, if he says it's 2 minutes and 3 seconds, it's 2 minutes and 3 seconds or not.
It reminds me of a different sport, but Michael Prater in 100 meter.
Yeah.
Not getting any 9.8s, 9.9s, but 10.02, 10 flat every race.
Time.
Yeah.
That's what he runs. That's what he runs. Car looks a little bit squirrely on the back there for all of these drivers. Maybe still tinkering with setups, or maybe it's better to have the car be that aggressive with the rear. I don't see how it helps with the cornering, as you can see lots of correction there from Mitchell. So, not quite sure where they where they are with their setups, how far along they are in terms of completing the setup that they will be using for the race.
I think they've been. Some of the drivers had some experience with this car. I'd say in the past 2 or 3 weeks, and all of them were saying that the back is extremely light. So I'm not even sure settings are going to help, or maybe they just haven't found it as it. But it's been quite a while, so I'm not sure what the issue is.
Yeah, I imagine the rear is going to be a little bit squirrely, but it looks extremely squirrely as we ride along with Mitchen here. If you look at some of the corrections he has to make, it's almost as if he is fighting the car through these corners. So we have a few drivers here that have run times, but none are even close to Mr. Harrison so far, in that we have Eastman 3.5 seconds down and Mitchen 6 seconds down. Again, maybe these drivers just trying to find the setup, but I realize Mitchen takes a much wider line through turn 2 than Jaden does. Jaden is almost cutting the corner. He is within track limits, but he is definitely as far inside as you can be, whereas Mitchen seems to take the apex at a normal clip.
That may actually be, or could possibly affect your stand, because being that the back is so light, you trying to take the normal line, it's basically you trying to do it on ice with a setup like this, because you're forcing the car, or hoping the cars would stick to the normal race line, which you can't. So maybe that's where Jaden is finding his advantage. This car is funny.
Well, I imagine looking at his sector 1 time in comparison to Jaden, he loses a second and a half there. But I don't necessarily see how. Okay, so that's 3 seconds in total. Okay, well, yeah, that looks closer to. Yeah, so that seems. So he does lose quite a bit of time in sector 1, and it seems that most of it is right there. Because in comparison to the lines Jaden takes through that section, it seems less. 1, he's carrying less speed, and 2, it seems less aggressive. So, folks, as we are here on this Friday evening, the drivers trying to find their setups, their lines, their break points, all in preparation for the Chase for Pace series that runs every Saturday from now until June 3rd, where we have the Peak Performance series starting on June 3rd. These drivers will be competing weekly, every Saturday, with different cars, different tracks, to push their driving skills to the brink to see who has the pace and the consistency over a 45-minute race with a 15-minute quali session per event. And
This is all in practice for the upcoming World Cup.
well, we are still awaiting some information on the World Cup, but I imagine these drivers will also be vying for a chance to represent Jamaica in the Esports World Championships that will be hosted in Romania this year. Details on that will come out as we get more information from the organizers of the qualifiers. That event is under the flag of the Jamaica Esports Initiative. So we will get most of our details and most of the information for that event from them. Mitchen Wallace seems to be finding pace with every lap, as he is now a second quicker than the lap before, and only 2.5 seconds off of Jaden Harrison. Maybe just working on his race pace here, Andrew.
Yes.
I imagine we will see where quali times look like Jaden's time. So maybe Jaden was on a quali sim run, and Mitchell is just as we get him squarely again there, as we mentioned before.
As you may note, Jaden seems to be really squaring the corners rather than riding the normal race line, as his car does not respond to turning input, so it won't slide in a straight line. So I guess the quicker you can get it into a straight line and put your foot down is the faster you'll be.
Indeed. So I think that is why you see Jaden take so much more aggressive lines, in that if you are tighter, you can straighten the steering wheel that much faster.
Precisely. Oh man.
Yeah, back end of this car is something else. Why you will be finding lots of struggles. Yep, as soon as we get on Eastman's onboard, we see him fighting with the rear as well. So not sure what the likeliness of tomorrow's race being incident free will be.
Are you aware of any the amount of degrees allowed on the rear of these cars for downforce?
So as far as I'm aware, in terms of the setups for this car, for this event, I don't think there are any downforce changes that can be made. I think the downforce is standard. They can make suspension changes, they can make differential changes, but I do not believe there is much change in the avenue of downforce for this weekend and this car.
It would only suspension. So I guess it probably would be in their favor to give the car a bit more, is it positive toe? So the back doesn't really count. I mean, you have no way of controlling the back with downforce, so you need to do it with camber and toes.
Yeah, so I feel like maybe more negative camber on the rear. You know, going through the corners, you will find a lot more grip.
Yeah. The front possibly facing altered.
Yeah.
So you can understeers a bit, because right now it's the drift event.
Yeah, that it is. And imagine that's a drift event in a four-wheel drive car. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm being informed that the car is rear. I may have made an error.
It's funny you said it was all-wheel drive because I always thought I never actually did the research for that because I assumed, Subaru, okay, automatically
Yeah.
all-wheel drive. Nissan GTR automatically, Audi automatically.
Yeah.
It's just recently I'm realizing that hey, who we drive.
Yeah. So wow, what a catch there by Eastman. And you would typically the R8 is a four-wheel drive car. So I guess just in terms of the GT2 version, maybe for a bit of weight saving, one less axle, and I guess for steering inputs. So as we progress through the evening, folks, we will be having interviews with some of the drivers when they're not out on track, obviously. This is not a ride and whistle sport. So when the drivers have some free time when they're not working on their setups or they're trying to put their laps together, we will see what the we will have a chat with them just to kind of get their feelings on the car events and other just getting to know the drivers in general. It's I'm not sure if you're familiar with this track outside of the Formula One Grand Prix, Andrew. Fun fact, neither am I. So when I was out on track doing laps around the circuit, I don't know if you would have noticed, but there is a chicane missing that would normally be there in the Formula One race. I spent laps upon laps going through that chicane, wondering why I was 10 seconds slower than everybody else. Because that chicane falls right in the middle of that back straight.
Oh, you're okay. I see what you're saying.
So that's the only difference between the GT3 track and the Formula One track, in that they removed that chicane. So I guess maybe the cars not being as nimble as the F1 cars,
Definitely.
that corner just poses too many problems.
I'm looking at the car here, and it kind of resembles the McLaren Senna.
There are similarities. I think it's mostly in how they have designed the aero, which the Senna is a very aero-heavy car. So maybe it's how they have done the aero on this version of the Audi R8 in order to get it to work in the GT3 format.
They missed the heavy part with this one though. The aero heavy, because it ain't sticking.
Yeah, they did. So I think what it is there is very little drag because it is quick in a straight line, but you don't get much in terms of rear downforce. And Roper showing exactly what you mentioned earlier, Andrew, in that he is also the one lap specialist. He has found not similar pace, he is still 7 tenths down, but he is in the 157s, the only other driver in the 157s at the moment. Proving to be a force to be reckoned with here this weekend as well.
Just can see here the maturity of missions. So he's there. Oh yes. So let him by, because most of the younger drivers would have taken that as a race.
Yeah.
I probably would have started to lower the pedal.
Get a little bit tested there. A little bit of wheel-to-wheel action in practice.
As Roper is quicker in the lap, it would be wise for Mission to actually use him as a guide somewhat. See if he
It could be valuable, as I see many drivers that just to spot his braking point, and this is one such example of you can see the difference in pace. Roper looking a little bit quicker there as he's now right on Michel's bumper. These two are both on flying laps, so there's no need for either to give way, but I imagine Roper's lap is being compromised at the moment, being a little bit stuck behind Michen, who is 2 seconds off his pace. But Michen seems to be bringing that gap closer and closer to being non-existent with each passing lap. 7 tenths down in the first sector compared to 1.5 previously.
Question, Chat. On a flying lap, I was wondering this. Both cars are on flying lap.
Mm-hmm.
Is it racing rules that apply at that moment? Meaning blocking, because you are trying to complete your lap as fast as you can. You don't want next man necessarily to pass you unless you're trying to get a draft. But outside of that,
so it is technically man for themselves, right? There's no obligation to give way. There is no need for any driver to back out of their flying lap. So it is somewhat racing rules in that neither driver is obligated to do anything, but it would be stupid to have an incident in practice when it's not necessary. I mean, it's not qualifying where this could be your fastest lap and you don't want to give that up. It's practice. If you're too close to a driver, back off, give him some space. Go again. You're working on your setup. You're working on finding the pace throughout the lap. Can't do that if you're hung down behind somebody. Can't do that if you're constantly looking in your rearview mirror, wondering where somebody else is. You're working on your own thing. So
must be frustrating. Imagine being on your final lap and you're fast. You placed basically your fastest first 2 sectors, only to be held up in the third.
right.
To
But
be
this
out
is
of the
why
grid.
yeah, but this is why you give yourself the necessary space. Again, this is practice. You give yourself adequate space on track and you don't have these problems. And maybe this is some of what these young drivers need to learn, in that there are ways to do things, that it's not just about being as fast as possible. There is etiquette, standards, racing form, decorum, things to practice that aren't necessarily just about the speed at which you go. But maybe Roper is actually using Michen to his advantage here and just getting the draft throughout the lap. Well, I don't imagine it's the easiest thing to follow in this car either.
Considering there's basically absolutely no downforce as it stands.
Right, there is that. Plus, as you mentioned, some of these corners do creep up on you very quickly. I mean, you typically as a driver, you should be able to drive a lap with your eyes closed, but it's not advisable. So you do need to be able to see where you're going, to know your braking points, and so on and so forth. When you're that tucked up behind a driver around a track where your braking points are already so difficult to spot, and some of it is by feeling, then you are another explanation could be that, Roper is currently using Michen to simulate what it would be like to sit in another driver's slipstream for the purposes of the race. You have to be able to note, what it's like following and how close racing is gonna feel.
And possibly where to pass as well,
Right.
considering the
That's a
space
good-
given.
That's a good point. I imagine lots of passing can be done on that back straight there. If you get the right drive coming out of that sweeping
Right-hander.
loop, you can then, once you get the proper drive, maybe you get a little bit more out of the corner than your opponent. You get the power down a little earlier. And that's a very long straight.
It's rough. Would you say, based on your estimation, that the final or the best place to pass would be the beginning of sector 3 at the end of that sweep? Would you, considering it doesn't seem that much space to pass once sector 3 begins? So do you think that's the optimal place to make it move?
So I wouldn't, on a track like this, I don't think so. It's not a very wide track. It is somewhat narrow. I would say most of the passing is going to be done either start, finish straight, or the long back straight. And I don't know about getting much passing done in the corners. Granted, you do see a lot of difference in pace because Mitch and Wallace, of the 2.1 seconds that he's missing, 1.5 of that is in sector 3. So you have a point in that there are drivers that are slow in sector 3, but the compromising of your lines in sector 3 is also ill-advised. You compromise one corner and that's the entire sector.
This car kind of reminds me of the concept when riding a bike. Final line, you have to stick with it because it's not forgiving at all.
I've not seen what times McName has done. As I've been looking, he's been 1.7 seconds down, but that gap does not make sense. So I'm not sure if it's just been an invalid lap. Maybe he hasn't completed
Probably.
a valid lap yet.
That's probably it.
Yeah, as track limits, they will get you this weekend. So he has completed a lap that is in the 158. So he's about 1.8 seconds. That is an accurate description of his time down, but it's just not a valid lap as he invalidated at, I'm not sure which court, but
Is there a track lap limit for this series, considering JSRA normally requires drivers to complete a certain amount of laps?
So for the entire series, for each week, before the race on Saturday, the driver is required to complete a minimum of 50 laps. And it's just to ensure that the driver is competent and does understand racing code and etiquette. For the peak performance, which is there is money on the line, so the stakes are a little bit higher. I imagine you would want your drivers a little bit more experienced and a little bit more track ready. So there's a minimum of 150 laps between each event. But the difference being they have 2 weeks to prepare for those events as opposed to every week for this event. So in 2 weeks, I imagine 150 laps should be a lot less strenuous to complete than 50 laps per week. And they'd also have a week where no racing activity is taking place, so that maybe that time could be used to gain those extra laps.
It seems like probably one of the better cars to actually master, because it definitely forces you to be smooth, and it also introduces you to two ways of driving as it relates to, as we were speaking about earlier, the race line and also squaring the line.
So I can see what you're getting at in that, yes, it is a car that mastering this car gives you an advantage in driving certain other cars.
Definitely.
One, you are only pushing power to two of the wheels, and it's the rear wheels, so you do tend to get oversteer a lot easier than you would in a four-wheel drive or a front-wheel drive car. And that being said, in a car that is as powerful as this car is, you definitely have to monitor your throttle control, as you see the driver getting rather squirrely there, Mitch and Wallace, who is Mr. Consistent, so that should show you what I'm getting at here in terms of smoothness of throttle, in that you can't put too much power down immediately out of the corner. You definitely have to modulate how you get the throttle down, and it will prove to be a challenge for the drivers. But yes, mastering this car does put you at in a considerable better position for driving some other vehicles that you would find. And this is certainly a track to master this car up.
Definitely. It's a headache, it seems, but the results are worth it.
So I see most of the drivers kind of lightly trail braking their way through that hairpin after the long straight and the sweeping corner. And I imagine it does make for a little bit of it's a very tricky braking zone, in that you have to kind of manipulate the car in a way that you don't lose it on the braking. So you can't brake too heavily turning into the corner. And it's very telling for a driver. Ooh, Eastman there having a bit of oversteer moment in turn.
You know those lines that we're seeing. I'm not sure that the correct name for them, but when you were driving, did they actually slow you down?
You do feel they are more abrasive than the track circuit, so you do feel the difference.
My first introduction to those runoffs were from the earlier Gran Turismos. I haven't played any newer ones, but the initial was like 2 and 3. They had them, and the moment the car went on it, it absolutely slowed right down. And I thought they were just cheating me.
No, so graphics have come a long way in that it's more realistic now than it was back then, but it does have the effect in that, as it has been explained, the red lines are the more abrasive. The blue lines are still abrasive, but not quite as abrasive as the red. And the purpose of that is more friction equals greater stopping power. So as a runoff, you see where once you're over there, if you're on the brake, you should be fine. But you do have to still be within reason. You can't just go flying off over there and expect the car to stop, as evidenced by Charles Leclerc last year there in the Grand Prix, having hit the wall in one of the largest runoff areas on the F1 calendar.
As you said, I just thought about it. Yeah, I mean, it's evident a lot of engineering goes into making these cars and the runoffs on the track and stuff like that. But you would think that more surface area or more of a contact patch would equal more stopping power. Yet, as you said, more friction in this case. But the friction would actually create less of a contact patch. So it's, if you understand what I'm getting at.
So I don't think it actually does create less of a contact patch. Sorry, folks, we're getting a bit of comedy here in the studio as our producer is fanning us.
We should do an interview with our producer. It's been long awaited. We need to introduce him.
Yeah, and you know, the president of the JSRA
Doing a
himself.
wonderful job. Absolutely wonderful job, I must say.
Yo,
Proud of him.
he seems very camera shy these days. I don't know why. You know, he's been on the radio a couple
But
times talking to the world.
He had a
you know.
lot of things to say prior to the stream. I
And
wonder what
they-
happened now.
Public figure, you know, the gal them sugar.
You know, we here at the JSRA, we speak it the truth and we speak it ever. But back to the race, as we were saying.
Indeed, indeed. Right, so I don't think it does create less of a contact patch per se, in that it's not, they're not very far raised from the ground. But it's just the surface is so.
That's what. That
Yeah,
is
you
what is
you
intriguing.
could be right. You could be right in that the surface does not lend itself to full contact as the track itself would.
I'm wondering. I'm not sure. I used to do track and field, and
Right.
the surface. What my mind is telling me it's something similar. I could be wrong, but it has that.
You're not far. You're not
you know,
far. off.
you get what I'm saying.
Right. So you're not far off in that, yes. So what you have to understand is full contact lends itself to stopping only when brakes are involved.
Yes.
Whereas
Yes, true.
if you're thinking about just a runoff area, friction is what breaks momentum. Even on the braking, friction is what breaks momentum. The disc rubbing against the rotor. So friction is the necessary force for stopping. And it's an aid. It's not gonna stop you, it just slows you down.
Like Max going over the entire sand patch at Silverstone. That contact to Lewis. All of that friction patch, nothing to stop it.
One of the highest impact crashes in recent years. That crash was on Max Verstappen, and that was having slid over quite a bit of track on that particular day. So as we've been watching along here, Andrew, it seems to be a two-horse race so far, and it's interesting to note that this isn't all of the drivers. So we may be seeing more drivers jump in throughout the remainder of the evening, but it does very much seem to be a two-horse race. As after Ropo, the next nearest person is Mitchen, and Mitchen has been finding time consistently, but he is still all of 2 seconds away from the lead up. At least Ropo is within a second of the lead, and maybe there is more pace to find. Some of these drivers are guilty of sandbagging, but do we expect to see, or do we hope to see any closer racing as we progress?
I think it's going to be a case of, like in F1, even though it really comes down to the package generally, but we're going to see a real difference in mid, top, and latter third as it relates to performance. We're having more of a separation throughout this track.
I think you might be right. And it is worth noting that, again, there are missing drivers. So we might see, for example, I know Mr. Mark Anthony will likely be participating in this event. You might see him join the practice session a little later on, but he might be closer to the top two. So maybe you are right. Maybe we will have two separate races, as well as it could also be like a Mitchen, as we have mentioned, is a lot more consistent than some of the other drivers. They may be faster, but over the span of a 45-minute race, consistency might come to your aid.
It's his longest race thus far, correct?
No, so I think the Saturday races are normally 45 minutes. So that is the typical length, but track-wise, given the nature of this circuit, and these two are at it again, Roper and Wallace seem to be practicing some form of slipstreaming strategy here for the event upcoming. Maybe trying to figure out where to make that pass.
If these drivers are intentionally doing this, it's probably one of the smarter things, as you said, in terms of learning the racecraft as it's applicable to this track, because it's one thing to be thinking about these corners, and it's another thing trying to be thinking about the person behind you or in front of you.
So I imagine they must be in contact at that point, because if not, they are putting a lot of trust in each other here, and I don't know. I mean, I'm a skeptic and a cynic, but I still don't see myself as a racing driver putting this much trust in someone else. And as we've mentioned before, the one lap specialist Jaden Harrison still finding time. He is now down into the 156s,
Almost
and
a half a second.
we are about a second away from pro times. I see the chat calling for an interview with El Presidente.
In due time, ladies and gentlemen.
He
In due
is-
time meaning quite soon, maybe in the next 3 minutes.
He's a bit of a shy one, so we have to kind of sweet him up before him find him way over here. So we'll keep working on it. We will get him here eventually, but maybe we will look to have an interview with one of the drivers momentarily. It seems most of the drivers are out on track at the moment, so I guess when they finish their current runs, we can look to maybe have a talk with one of them.
It'd be interesting to hear from Jaden and possibly Wallace, actually. Two different approaches to the same track. It would be interesting to hear what either of them had to say.
I agree with you, just to see if maybe they are on different practice strategies or what the current scenario is, to see that difference. And it's interesting because Mitchen does seem to have similar pace to the others in Sector 2, but Sector 2 being that very long back straight primarily, I guess would lend itself to those times being similar. But the technicalities of Sector 3 and Sector 1 not so much, but there are still some intricacies to that section. So maybe time lost there as well. Or maybe the setup just doesn't lend itself to the kind of cornering that needs to happen, and there may need to be some adjustments there.
How would you judge? You always hear people saying, "Oh, this driver is better than this driver, and this driver is better than this driver." But do you truly think you can gauge, compare a driver to another driver, considering nothing will ever be equal? Meaning, we can have the same car, we don't have the same brain, we don't have the same reaction time. Is someone who has a slow reaction time that wins a race better than someone who has a fast reaction time? There's so many other variables that go into deciding something like that. How would you?
So I think those factors are a part of how you gauge a racing driver in terms of I don't see a scenario in which a slower reaction time is a beneficial feature in racing. You know what I mean? I need to be able to react to cars around me. I need to be able to react to where I get on my brakes. And if I know that my braking point is the 100-meter board, I need to be able to react to the 100-meter board in the shortest possible time at all times.
True.
So,
And with that thought, that same thought that you just said, so would you then say, considering that the reaction time, you would agree or think that it is more beneficial to have a fast reaction time? Someone with a slow reaction time who is winning races consistently, would you then say he is better? Because we are technically going off popular belief, meaning, let's say in your case, the fastest time, the guy who can run the fastest or faster should be able to win the race. But
So-
it may not necessarily be the truth for that particular track, you
so
know.
I will speak in the terms that I can best use as an example. Let's take Formula One, right? I've been an adamant follower of Formula One for the last 12 to 15 years. And you can take a few drivers to use as examples here. You can take a Charles Leclerc, blistering one lap pace, as evidenced by the most recent Grand Prix at Azerbaijan, in a car significantly slower than the two Red Bulls, as evidenced in the race, was able to find qualifying pole position in not one but two sessions. Found it for the sprint, and he found it for the Grand Prix itself. Quick as a bunny over a lap. But we see errors come out of him consistently throughout events. Checo Perez, not necessarily as fast. And you can even compare Checo and Max. In this year, because last year was a little bit of a delicate scenario in that the car was changed to suit Max. But that is inter-team politics, which I'm not going to get into. I'm looking at two drivers. Checo Perez has consistently proven that he can maximize, get the most out of a car, no matter what team he is in. And you look at the Max Verstappen, also gets the most out of a car, but it's done very differently.
One team as well so far.
He is a more aggressive driver. He is a faster driver. He can get the grips with a car a lot quicker. I think he's more adaptable. All of those factors add up to one racing car. This year, they look a little bit more even on paper. Does that mean Checo's as good as Max? Absolutely not. And this is coming from somebody that despises everything about Max Verstappen. No.
Hold that thought. I'm gonna get a bit more extreme with the comparison.
Okay.
As you said, it generally comes down to how much you can. Well, in terms of Checo, he can get the most out of, or has been getting the most of each team he's been in so far, right? We've only seen Max in Red Bull, so the only changes would definitely be just from car to car that they've produced. Fine.
Right.
All right. So in the case, for example, because indefinitely we're going to use championships and points and stuff like that. That's going to influence it. However,
let's for example say George spent his entire career at Williams, right? Never finished above 10th, let's just say,
Okay.
right? But he's consistently with that car, with what he has had for his entire career, never winning a championship, always finished 10th. It's highly unlikely, but you get where I'm going with this.
Right.
Max, 1, 2, 3, 4 championships, whatever the case is. When you put them side by side, who would you say is the better driver? George has never won a championship, and in my example, he would have never won because he would have remained with Williams. Not to say them win, but how would you gauge something like that?
All right, so it's kind of funny you bring up George and Max, right? In that I looked at when George Russell came into F1. I saw him outperform a car that was arguably the worst car on the grid for seasons. He would find that car in Q2, it had no business in Q2. He would find himself in position to score points on occasion. Didn't materialize in most of those occasions. That man has had some poor luck. But he would consistently be in a position where he is far outperformed the car. And that to me is a gauge of a driver. But again, can you compare him side by side to Max Verstappen? No. They've been in different machinery. They've had different experiences. It's not the same. Here's a better comparison. Let's take George Russell and his 7-time world champion teammate Lewis Hamilton.
Okay.
With age comes a little less reaction. Yes. George Russell, over a season, beat Lewis Hamilton. One of only 3 persons that can say they have done that as his teammate. When you look at the way Lewis has been driving, there's going to be arguments coming from last season about what he was dealing with in terms of experimental setups, yada yada. Does that impact what he was able to do over the course of the season? Probably. But George still beat him. Now, this season they've been a little bit closer in terms of when you look at their side by side, they've kind of been more back and forth where George might be quicker this weekend and Lewis might be quicker the next weekend. If you want to look at it from that perspective, maybe George's reaction times are a little bit better than Lewis as it stands currently because George is a little bit younger and a little bit more, in his prime, whereas Lewis has been doing this for almost 15 years, actually more than 15 years. And so being a seasoned veteran, he has the experience to still be able to push a car, but maybe not to the Lewis of 5, 6, 7 years ago. So again, it's just things to compare that make a racing driver a racing driver. At different stages of your career, there are different things that you can do to keep your skills to a certain standard, but overall there's a package that makes a good racing driver a good racing driver.
So you would then say, with the ever-changing conditions as it relates to, cars and the competition and the drivers and age, that kind of stuff, it's still very much subjective. You
I
don't
would
generally
think so.
have an yes.
I would think so. In that you can look at the records held by Lewis Hamilton, previously held by Michael Schumacher. But Michael Schumacher was by no means a qualifying specialist. He was just a masterclass race car driver.
It's a good way to put it.
And there will be a debate that Lewis Hamilton, greatest of all time. No Michael Schumacher, no Ayrton Senna.
Yes.
And the arguments can be made for all 3. We did not get to see all of Senna's career because God took him a little early. But arguments can be made for all 3. People throw Nicky Lauda in there from time to time, or Jim Clark in there from time to time, but they're from a different era, so you may not know what they would have been capable of in today's machinery. But it's just there are different intricacies to determining what makes the ultimate racing driver the ultimate racing driver.
What do you think, other than a driver winning races, for example, in my time, like I'm old, but in my time, in the Schumacher era, my driver was Mika Hakkinen. I absolutely loved that driver and that car. I loved the livery on the car, that the West livery, everything about it. I mean, he wasn't winning everything, but for me, in my mind, he was just the best. I don't hear a lot of people talking about him, but I'm asking you, what do you think are the other factors that affect or influence people to choose? I'm not gonna use the word subpar, because he's nowhere at all. But not the typical media.
So I think
King.
that you hit the nail on the head there. Lots of people like an underdog. Lots of people like an antagonist to a protagonist, or vice versa. So you're talking about Michael Schumacher being hyped as the greatest to ever do it. Meanwhile, Mika Hakkinen is quietly winning his Grand Prix here and there, his one world championship. I could be wrong here. Is it one world championship?
Bro, I just love the car.
Feel like he has one. I would have to fact check. But yeah, it's just the comparison between different things. So you might have seen, oh, Michael Schumacher is everybody, public opinion. I don't want to be part of public opinion. Mika Hakkinen, quietly doing his thing, very good driver. And could be in the running to battle head to head with Michael Schumacher on a given day.
Definitely.
So just to kind of take away from the mundane of everybody being a Michael Schumacher fan, I'm gonna be a Mika Hakkinen fan. Just like Lewis and Max. Lewis was winning everything for 7 years.
True.
Here comes this
It's a valid point.
young, arrogant,
Valid point.
aggressive fellow that is a very competitive, fast driver. But to unseat the king and just give us a change, let's take Max Verstappen. We do have an interview coming up here with Jaden Harrison, as we have switched gears completely and gone on a Formula One rant.
He seemed to have found an extra 2/10.
Yes,
We might be looking at 155, man.
yeah, we will have a chat with Jaden Harrison just to get a feel for, the driver himself, and get the fans involved with these drivers. Right, so we will be having a chat with the fastest man on track at the moment, in Jaden Harrison. Jaden, can you hear me?
Yeah, I read you.
So Jaden, we see you out here, a second and a half quicker than the next nearest person to you. Is that ultimate pace? Is there still a little more in the tank? Are you still working on your setup? What's the situation?
So I have the setup dialed for the car right now, and tire pressures and things. But the track grip isn't optimum, so I feel there's a next second or a second and a half out there with the optimum grip. But the way the track is, so speed corners, the grip level doesn't matter as much as with the high downforce, high speed cornering track. So the time difference won't be that big. But yeah, it's going good so far. But there's definitely some time to spare. The lines are a bit different with the lower grip, so that's a big learning curve for coming on to the track with different grip levels.
So a second and a half. That's quite some time there, considering you're already nearing what is considered pro pace. But talk to me about the track limits. I imagine I've seen some drivers struggling with the track limits. How have you been finding the track limits, particularly around this circuit?
Yeah, so the track limits are a bit different from what we usually drive on because the the rumble strips are a bit wide, have two white lines. So just finding that sweet spot on the track. And yeah, but the rumble strips can kill the car around certain corners, gets the rear end a bit spicy. So you just have to watch for that. But it's definitely a learning curve, this track.
That is for sure. And just so that we can get a little background on you, how long have you been in the sim racing world, and what are your plans with this platform going forward? We do see great potential in you, so we're just kind of gauging what this all means for you.
I've been racing for 4 years. The setup platform is a good platform, but we're seeing the likes of ACC being used worldwide right now. So I feel that's the next step. That's the next thing to learn. Yeah, just aim on getting more consistent. Aim on um, doing better on the track in the race. Right, rate defensive lines and things. But yeah,
Okay. And talk to me about your preparation for a race, and what training exercises you go through. How do you dial in the car on a specific track? Because the pace that you seem to be able to find over a lap is unmatched in this particular brand of competition so far. So, just give us an idea of your preparations.
so what I do first is I learn the track and then learn the car. Try to push the car a bit. Then I throw on a bit of setup, fix the tire pressures, put on some basic stuff like toe and camber. Depending on the car, is understeering, oversteering, getting it to my driving style. When I dial that in now, then I'll go for hot laps because what I try to do in the hot laps is find the racing line because the racing line can change with track grip, temperatures, tire, um, compound and things. So I find the racing line on the hot lap, and once I have the racing line, it's straight consistency from there. Once you got your braking points and you know the line, it can't get any better than that. It's just practicing those two simple things.
Okay, and we have one question coming in from the chat for you. A Assetto Corsa or a Assetto Corsa Competizione? What is your preferred platform?
Right now, I prefer Assetto Corsa, but I'm learning ACC. It's a learning curve because it requires a lot more knowledge and being able to drive the car a lot different than in AC and taking care of the car and things. Over a race, ACC is definitely a bit difficult and it's a lot to learn. But right now, I prefer AC. But as I learn ACC, it will be my preferred sim.
Okay, and final question for you this evening, Jaden. What's the grand plans as far as sim racing is concerned?
Just to take it as far as my potential.
Concise answer, appreciate it. All right, Jaden, thank you for your time. We will let you get back to your running, and good luck for the rest of the weekend. Look forward to an exciting race tomorrow.
No problem, thanks.
All right. All right, folks, that was Jaden Harrison. Currently leads the time charts, and one of the promising talents we have on this platform currently. We may hear from another driver a little bit later on. We will let you know ahead of schedule who we're setting up a time for. So as we proceed here, Jaden Harrison pointing out that track conditions are not at an optimum at the moment. You know, they're a little ways, not too far off optimum, but they are a little off. And Jaden thinks he might have Andrew another second to a second and a half pace to find around this circuit.
I don't think any of these walls can be easily driven through, so I'm not sure he's going to manage to do any of that. A second and a half. That's
Yeah, so
quite a bit.
so we were looking at 155s, you know, he's thinking 154s.
Okay. That would be interesting to see.
And that would put him ahead of, as you remember our earlier graphic showing the times for the individual classes. You know, he would be ahead of the pro times, as the pro times are a 155.4. He would be down in 154s. So, as he also mentioned, taking this sim racing thing as far as it can go, maybe he can go pro in the future.
He
As-
definitely can.
As long as he keeps working on his craft, you know?
He definitely.
Or on a second and a half. And Kayla, excuse me, is no slouch. Definitely not. And he's up.
He's already up a second and a half.
Exactly.
That, you know. And only 18 years old, you know, these kids these days, they just make things look easier than it really is. But I guess that's what happens when you find a passion and devote yourself to it. So, folks, as we are approaching the last 15, maybe 20 minutes of practice here that we will be broadcasting this evening, the drivers are not limited to this 2 hour session, but we are in terms of broadcasting time. We will be possibly talking to one more driver, maybe talking to the president of the JSRA. But depends on whether or not he sees fit to join us for this interview. You know, the fans want to hear from him, but boy, I'm still not going like him shy.
Once the mic is off, speakers on. Once the mic is on, speakers off.
Which and having an incident there in turn one. So I think the tricky corners we've seen so far this weekend, Andrew, are turn one and the final turn. So things to watch for in the race tomorrow, how that particularly develops. So El Presidente has dodged a bullet as we will be interviewing one Mitch and Wallace, the driver currently number second on the charts. But he, there we are missing Cale Vaden Roper, who has since left the server. So Mitchen is ready to go whenever we are, and I think he will be interviewed by my commentary partner, Mr. Andrew Spence.
Hey, evening, guys.
Good evening, Mission. The great, consistent Mission. How are you doing this evening, brother?
All right, how you guys doing?
Here, man, watching you do a couple of laps and making some comparisons. How are you finding the track so far?
It's actually a pretty tricky track. It seems straightforward, but it seems to be very dependent on corner exit and not entry speed, as most tracks are known for. Add to the fact that it's kind of a tricky car, so it's something that you have to put the work in to actually stitch a perfect lap or laps together, because it doesn't like curves, and the back end is kind of it's not your friend if you're not careful on the throttle. So it's something to work on. I'm still trying to get used to it.
Okay, not to give out any of your secrets, but are there any particular adjustments you're finding helpful as you're driving? Because I noticed the car seems to have absolutely no rear and downforce, and it's not just your car alone. Everyone seems to have that issue. What have you changed to counteract that problem?
Nothing. I'm actually still
Nothing.
running the stock setup.
Oh, stock setup. That probably would explain the time.
Yeah, at this point, I'm actually just trying to get used to the car. I'm not trying to, mess with the dynamic.
Oh, I was wondering because our last conversation, you and I were speaking about the age gap, and we old folks may not have the necessary reaction time as the younger folks. Do you think that plays any part in your performance currently, or it's mainly the stock setup, you would say?
No, not really. This car actually requires more patience than aggression. The aggression works. What I've noticed though with it is that you might be able to be aggressive with it, but for how long? So depending on the duration of each race that we get using this car during the peak performance tournament, being aggressive might actually be the double-edged sword that a lot of people don't need. So I'm actually going between being aggressive and being consistent, because more people than not will agree that being consistent gets you better results over time than being aggressive in a short span.
Okay. For those who are watching who have no idea who you are, would like to get to know who Mission is, what kind of introduction would you give them to yourself as it relates to yourself personally and your experience as it relates to sim racing and how you got into it?
Right, so my experience or how I got into sim racing was actually through Steven, our director. He had a little program that he started up by the UTech, the JEI headquarters. They used to meet like once on a Sunday. I would go up and see what I could do. Wasn't very good then. I'm a little better now, but that time I was like back of the pack. Eventually, I did what I needed to do and got a wheel. Started to do some practice. Been slowly upgrading over the last year and a half, I believe. So I have slowly been growing. Um, I'm one of the older guys, but you know them say old but not cool. But
Yeah,
that time I would do it.
you're in my estimation probably the most consistent driver on the grid. Don't know if that's a testament to your practice or racecraft or what, but it's always a pleasure to watch you drive. And we have a question from one of your fans, and Nick Pendley. I don't know if you know who that is.
Yeah, I know, Nick.
Oh, Nick is asking you, what kind of equipment are you using? You don't have to disclose it because you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but he's asking,
Well, I recently moved up from the entry level wheel, which was the Logitech G29. I did every modification I think is possible to that wheel and the pedals,
Okay.
but I have recently made the transition to a direct drive wheel. It's very hard to get used to, but I'm taking my time to get used to it.
Okay. Okay. I've never experienced that, but um, the closest I've been was the T300, and it works or has worked wonders. So hopefully soon enough you get in tune on that wheel, and we can see more coming from you, Michelle.
Yeah, no doubt. I just have to put in the time to and the effort to make myself better.
Definitely. Always a pleasure, Michelle. Uh,
All right.
good
Have a good one.
practicing.
So, folks, we've just heard from the Mr. Consistent Mitch Wallace, and as we are winding down our broadcast of practice, remember these drivers have the server open all day, all night, so they can run their practice whenever they so see fit. But we just brought you a 2-hour special to see what these drivers are on about. And we will be wrapping up in 12 minutes. Still, no one has come even slightly close to Jaden Harrison. So I'm still wondering if there's a bit of sandbagging going on, but I gather from Andrew's interview with Mitchell, maybe some drivers still haven't really tinkered with the setup, maybe trying to dial in the car at stock before they start messing about. Maybe the configuration at stock is probably as good as it's going to feel. You don't really know what a driver is feeling, as well as knowing who Mitchell is. It was just a matter of not sharing trade secrets.
Ah, yes. I think we're for quite a race, Chad. I'm not sure how many cars are going to remain on track after corner one, especially those who realize that you really have to remain in front early on if you want probably a chance of staying in front.
Well, we will certainly see what the approach each racer takes is. I mean, for drivers like Harrison that know they have the 1 lap pace on everybody else, he could take it a little less aggressive going into turn one. But that all depends on who's on pole when we have qualifying tomorrow. It could be maybe there is another contender in the fold, because again, this isn't all of the drivers. Some
Definitely.
drivers will make appearances a little later on, and we will see what that entails at that point in time.
I actually saw that it's Daville Park.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, who is also one of the other fast drivers. He made an entrance, but didn't see any lap times. Didn't see. But definitely
McName.
someone to look out for.
Oh, McName seems to be on pace with Mitchen, but has not yet completed a clean lap. He is being defeated by track limits, which,
Yes.
as mentioned before, and Jaden said it as well, it's quite a bit to come to grips with, because it's
it may be a bit frustrating as well for him, if considering he's probably one of the faster drivers as well, not being able to catch up with the top four. He may be getting a bit of anxiety, impatience in trying to compensate for what he has lost.
No, trust me. As I said, I did some laps around the track earlier this week, and it took me a while before, as Eaton has now joined the server, so we another driver to look out for here as we wrap up this session. Maybe we get a few laps before the session ends, we will see. But yeah, as we have made mention of time and time again. Well, sorry, as I was saying, I did a few laps earlier, and it took me a while to keep it within the lines, because it is very easy to try and get the power down a little bit earlier, or take more corner speed through an apex to try and maximize your lap time. But any miscalculation and you're outside of track limits just like that, because there is no corner that gives you any leeway. It is the white lines, and that is that. That was a catch by Kimani Eastman right there. These drivers seem to be wrestling this car around the circuit. And still about a second off of Mitchen at the top there. Keep in mind, Mr. Roper and Mr. Harrison are both quicker than Mitchen at the moment in terms of one lap pace. So just things to note. We will have a look to see where Eaton is, but doesn't seem to be out on circuit just yet, so we will make note. Another thing to note, Andrew, is so far we see runners on the medium tire and on the soft tire. Interesting to see what the tire strategies are for tomorrow. My experience is the medium tire seems to be the more reliable tire, both over one lap and for durability.
It's funny you should make mention of that, because we didn't address that at all. I don't know why we didn't think of that. It was Harrison's whole lap, as you'd call it, on the mediums.
I think it was. And so, once again, maybe he is correct in that there is a second and a half for him to find out there. Who's to say?
Stan's looking a bit skimpy. I don't know if Steven, didn't sell enough tickets. What's going on in chat?
Well, we could get him on to answer that, but still camera shy over there.
He's adamant of saving the best for last. So, yes, we're working with that for now. Maybe we'll get an interview on race day, or maybe in the qualification.
Yo. So as we have 6 minutes to go here, folks, it looks like wherever the times are now, that's where they stand. But we are hoping to see Eaton out on track, as he's still in the pits. Only 3 drivers out on track at the moment, actually. My name still seems to be struggling with track limits, as he is now back up. So all drivers seem to have gone back to the pits. As we are winding down our broadcast here, maybe time for some setup changes.
Chad, do you know if they'll be running unique liveries tomorrow? I'm always interested to see what they come up with.
So, as I understand it, it's just whatever liveries are available in the game for that particular car. In maybe the peak performance event, they will be running custom liveries to represent the JSRA and the different sponsors that would be showcased to that event.
I actually did a livery when I just started racing with the JSRA, created one, and Steven told me that my liver is horrendous, so I couldn't compete. I was shell shocked, absolutely shell shocked. But you know, rules are rules.
Well, once again, he could answer for himself, you know, to give his side of the story, but he is adamant on staying off of the chat this evening, so I guess he'll just have to live with the consequences of knowing that he's a terrible human being for banning somebody from racing due to the fact that their liver was crap. Doesn't look like we'll be getting much more action here for the remainder of the session. Well, Eastman is out on track and he has switched from the mediums to the softs. Eaton is out on some mediums, so let's take a look at what Mark is capable of here. This looks to be his first flyer.
Have you ever seen? I'm not sure if it has anything to do with the rules, but have you ever seen a tire, an intentional tire combination? So, for example, the back is very sliding. This is so we'd say, okay, put the softs on the back and keep mediums at the front. Do you think?
Based on racing regulations, that's actually not allowed. In most classes of racing.
So then, would it be considered an accident? Because you remember that time Russell, I think they had done that. It was Russell or Bottas?
Bottas, and he had to pit immediately after.
Oh, he had. Oh,
yeah.
okay, I didn't remember.
So that was actually the biggest blunder in Mercedes history, as they would call it, the Netflix curse, as Netflix was in their garage that weekend. But that wasn't a blunder. But, right, that was not intentional by any stretch of the imagination, as George Russell actually got Bottas's tires, which is why he ended up with the mix set. And then Russell had to pit to change those tires, as he is also not allowed to drive with Bottas's tires. Okay. They are designated per driver, per car. So lots of blunders took place that weekend. El Presidente, who does not want to be on chat, was keen to point out Monaco with Valtteri Bottas and that tire gun incident where they could not get the tire off under any circumstances, and they had to take the car back to Bristol where their head office is before they could get the tire off of that car. That tire was stuck. Okay, so Eaton's just starting his first flyer as we have literally about a minute to go here in this practice session, so we will ride on board with him for his first flyer, as it
His
will be.
first or last.
Indeed, indeed. So as I mentioned, folks, these drivers can be here all night if they so see fit. But this is where our broadcast ends, so we will see what the lap we get from Mark Anthony Eaton is, and that is where our broadcast will end. But these drivers still have lots more practice to go before the race tomorrow. So we will be departing you momentarily, but we will leave a few laps of on camera streaming for you to take note of what the drivers are still doing if you want to stick around. But we implore you to join us tomorrow for the actual race event, where there will be a 15-minute quali and a 45-minute race. And coming up for maybe this event and future events, there will be giveaways taking place, coupons, and so on. So, you know, if you are interested in seeing what prizes are on offer, you had best tune in. You get some racing action and a potential free pizza. You will see. So, folks, as Mark Anthony Eaton moves to the top of the timing charts, keep in mind that is of the drivers currently in the session, as Jaden's 1:57 dead is still the fastest time so far. So, Mark with 1.3 seconds to find, which he will be about 9/10 off of Jaden's pace as long as he keeps his lap together. So far, he is up 4/10 on his previous time. But this is where we, your commentators, will leave you. I have been the ever talkative Chad Dillon, joined here by Mr. Andrew Spence. Andrew, anything to the fans before we go?
Well, I'm just anticipating the race for tomorrow. We seem to have, as usual, good group of drivers. You have the consistents, the fasters, as I'd call them, the top performers. Yeah, it's just a matter of time, and I'm really interesting to see how this race plays out, because under these conditions, there's absolutely no pressure other than trying to find the fastest lap, you know, which is not necessarily a wise thing to be looking at. You should be focusing on setup and be focusing on how the car reacts. And as we saw Kale and mentioned earlier, they more than likely have the edge in terms of what a race battle would be like. So, as I said, interesting to see what tomorrow holds, and it's always a pleasure, Chad, as usual, hosting alongside you.
Indeed. So, folks, tune in tomorrow for some on-track action where it's more than just laps, and we hope to see you there. Right. So folks, we look forward to seeing you at 7:30 p.m. tomorrow for Poly. Race begins 15 minutes after that. So tune in, take in some action on track, and we'll talk to you then.